Hey guys, it's Leila from Ignite and I'm here with Jonny.
Hello.
And in today's video, we'll be addressing our advice for approaching the Module B study. If you're an advanced student, that's the critical study. And if you're a standard student, that's the closed study.
That's right, but before we get into it, please do check out our online resource channel at ignitehsc.com.au. Little plug for us. We've invested a lot of time and energy into those resources. Please do check them out. They are made to provide you with practical guides for the HSC to really help you in the way that we would have loved to be helped with these kind of comprehensive guides. Everything you need to know. So let's get into the video. Yes. Please like and subscribe. In fact, subscribe right now. And let's get into it.
Alright, so Module B, the critical or closed study, irrespective of the lens through which you're addressing it. In this module, what the markers are really looking for in your essay is the student's ability to showcase the level of depth that they've gone into on a particular composer and their works. So what do we need to do? What are you going to put into your notes? How are you going to address that drafting essay process? That's what we're going to touch on in the video. But I guess the starting point, the number one thing that you need to be doing in this module is going through all of the text that is prescribed, if it's a body of poetry, all of the individual poems, or if it's a novel, and you're doing a close analysis, which involves the analysis of both the form, the macro construction, how you characterize that particular text type, its genre, its voice, and so on, and then the micro analysis of the features of that text, the language that is used sentence by sentence throughout. So you start with that. Once you've looked at that, the broader construction, the sentences themselves, you're starting to think about overarching ideas that come up throughout this body of work, the values that are raised. And when you start touching on those values, you might like to consider why are these particular values conveyed, and that's going to segue into an analysis of context. So the particular contextual paradigms that this composer is responding to and how that's influenced the ideas that they're conveying within their work. I implicitly gestured towards form earlier on, rather explicitly. Form is central to your analysis as well. You need to look at perhaps the connection between the literary period of that composer and the types of formal modes that they engage in their writing. And if you are doing advanced, you should then take a look at critical interpretations of your composer. So taking a look at essays written about that composer and how other people's interpretations have enhanced or challenged or developed your own understanding of that text. So that's really the crux of Module B. Number one, going through, doing that close analysis which involves both the form and the features, considering context in light of the values that are raised, and if you're doing advanced, the critical interpretation. So to both students that are watching this video that are either advanced or standard, the real difference here from the critical and the closed study is really just your use of critics. If you're an advanced student and you want to be getting into that band 6 range, use critics. If you're standard, it's not really expected. But that's, I guess, the overview of the module. You're going into critical depth to develop a personal understanding of a text, and you're also engaging with ideas of textual integrity, which we'll come back to later on in the video. Anything to add?
Yeah, well, I think that was a great overview. There's like almost nothing left to say for the video.
I went to rant.
No, it's very good. So I'll just elaborate on a couple of points. The first one I picked up on when they were saying formal modes, just for a few of you out there, just to clear up, looking for formal modes attached to literary periods. For instance, if you're looking at text that's come after 1945, maybe it's a postmodern text, and maybe it's using particular features, particular formal elements, such as intertextuality or metatextuality or other common things. Even third person, unreliable narration is something that's common in a postmodern text. So look at when the text comes out and see if there's any particular features, and you can do this through research, look at resources and things like that to figure out what these are.
Our resources.
Yeah, they're the best kind, but if you want to settle for less, go somewhere else. Google's good. So if you want to find out which aspects of form, so I've given you some examples there, like the type of narrative voice that's used. You want to look at the context out of which the text has emerged and really see if you can make some connections there, because that's going to show a more critical, a more closer engagement with the text and why it's going to help explain why certain choices by the composer have been made. Yeah,
and I think just to clarify, when you're looking at context, there are two lenses through which you can address context. Of course, you've got the material, historical context of the time and the paradigms associated with that. For example, the historical ways of thinking, the social, the philosophical, the psychoanalytic, the gendered expectations of a time, they're all part of the material context. The literary period is the characterization of texts that were written during that time. So if we're looking, for example, at T.S. Eliot, his literary period is modernism, but his actual historical context is around the First World War. So just remember to distinguish between those material contexts, the actual events of those time, and then the literary period. Of course, these two ideas aren't mutually exclusive. the literary period is responding to the material history of the time. But when you're looking at form specifically, the way that literary periods are defined is often by the ways of writing during that time. So for example, if you are doing T.S. Eliot, modernists were very much so interested in fracturing traditional poetic modes. Fragmentation thus comes through. The, I guess, contextual influence of Freud speaks to the interest in the subconscious, the psychoanalytic insight that Eliot offers. So just remember to distinguish those aspects of context. And you can see, even by the dialogue that Jonny and I have just had, these are how you form critical interpretations. The student is expected to investigate a little bit further than you usually would in a study of one particular set text. I often say to my students, Module B is in some ways the easiest module because you're only focusing on one composer and you're going into depth. Contrast Module A, where it's almost a little bit of a mess as you're trying to float through these two texts and this giant conversation and a broader conversation of intertextuality. But here, I guess the payoff for you focusing on one text is that there's a greater expectation that you're going into depth, and depth means a little bit of investigation into the text. Perhaps now we should segue then. I think it's a nice point to raise textual integrity as one of the key ideas that's raised in the rubric.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly two points to I know you're on a roll here, but so with critical interpretations, in terms of, a question sometimes students ask is, do I actually have to refer to a specific critic? And my answer to that would be, there are two ways to refer to critical interpretations or critical readings. One, you can refer to a particular critic. You could use their last name and provide a quote from something they have written in an essay. You could do that once or twice. I wouldn't say you need to do it anymore, because remember, it's meant to also be a personal interpretation. So you don't want to make your whole essay based on someone else's opinion. Of course, you might be thinking, well, I don't know what I personally think of this. Well, we're just talking about, as long as you discuss things as if you are presenting it as a personal reading, even if it's been informed by what you've learned in class from your teacher, even if it's your teacher's perspective or whatnot, it doesn't matter. You just don't want it to sound like you are basing everything off one particular critic. So using a critic once or twice, maybe two different critics to show different perspectives. And also, if you do that, using them not just to support your personal interpretation or what you purport to be your personal interpretation, but also to contradict. So a really sophisticated response might put forward their argument and you might give evidence for it, and you might say, on the other hand, this particular critic has said X and Y, and give a quote of them and explain why that's interesting and why that diversifies your perspective.
So whilst I read this symbol and this poem as a representation of this essay poses this idea which contradicts my thesis about the poem. So you're trying to show how there's that tension between your idea and other ideas. So I guess the locus of your essay, the centrality, is your personal voice, and we'll talk a little bit about what that actually includes. But then, of course, you can gesture towards other people's opinions and you can contrast there. One point that I also wanted to raise was, okay, well, where do you bring the critics into your essay? I wouldn't start off a paragraph with a reference to a critic, right? You've got to give your analysis first and integrate the critical interpretation, if possible, with relation to a specific piece of evidence. So my view of this symbol and my view of this reference in the poem is X. My view has perhaps been informed by this critic who says this, if it's in alliance with your view. But if there's a dissonance between those views, you could then say, whilst I pose this person has interpreted this in this way. And you may also even, I guess, ground their view in their context as well. So if you're studying an older text, a particular interpretation might be linked to a neoclassical view or a romantic view or a modernist view. You can use their literary periods to justify why they're interpreting that particular text in a certain way. So that's another, I guess, point to consider. Yes,
and the other type of way that you can use a critical reading, right? So we've said you can actually use the critic once or twice to make sure you embed it within the body paragraphs after you've established what your opinion is. I was going to say, side point, I noticed that you were saying kind of my view is, do you mean that literally? Do you want students to be writing I, my?
Yeah, so certain schools have a little bit of a personal take on that. I do suggest to my students that you can use first person. I think if you're confident enough to do it, do that. If it feels a little bit off for you or unnatural, I mean, don't write in a way that doesn't feel right. But I think if there is any module where you would be using a first person voice, it would be module B. Of course, you have to do it in your reflection statement for module C. You have to bring in first person. And it might be natural to bring it up in module, in the common module as well, when you're talking about human experience. I mean, you're an authority on that, so you can use I. But yeah, it's optional. I suggest it though.
Yeah, I usually go with like, if you don't feel really confident with it, don't worry about it, because if you're presenting an essay, even if it's written in third person, it typically is impliedly your opinion.
Exactly
so
right.
Don't stress about that too much.
That's right. That's a good point.
I was going to add, so the second type, you can actually just refer to the kind of brand of critical perspective as a whole, if you like. So you can say a feminist perspective or a psychoanalytical perspective, a post-colonial perspective. You can actually research the types of perspectives and kind of refer to the broad category of the perspective and put that in as well. You don't have to get a particular critic, and that would be equally valid, and you can do that once or twice. I would say that's all you need to do for the critical, on the critical side of things.
Agreed. Yeah, and I guess just harking back to what I mentioned earlier about what makes for a personal view, well, the fact that you're writing this essay makes it very personal. One, I guess, interesting point that you could consider is how your view of these ideas connects to your own contemporary context. So often there are connections to be made between the world of your composer and your own world that speaks to the enduring or the perennial questions that the text you're studying raises. So for example, if you're looking at Eliot, there are ideas that Eliot raises regarding modernity or isolation, which speak very much to a contemporary reader, and you might state in your response how Eliot's notion of this is relevant to our contemporary context, and through doing that comparison it shows that you are inherently personally engaging with the ideas being conveyed. So that's another point to consider, how to integrate a personal reading.
Absolutely. Were there anything else, other points, key points we need to talk about there?
Just briefly, I think textual integrity, it's in the rubric. Sometimes it comes up in questions. Students don't really know how to address it. In a nutshell, textual integrity refers to the composer's consistent use of form throughout their body of work, which ties it together as an integrated whole. So it's when you're taking note of what is really characteristic of the way this composer writes, and how does that contribute to this overarching interconnectedness of the ideas that are conveyed. And I really think that's the essence of Mod B.
That's it. Yeah, that's a good summary of it. I'll add one point I just thought about, which I was going to mention earlier, is that when you are talking about context, right, what you'll notice with a lot of the texts that are studied, for example, An Artist of the Floating World was coming to mind, a lot of times when we talk about context, it's interesting how context and setting are kind of distinct. And what I mean by that is the context of the actual composer, the time at which they release their text, is often distinct from the context in which the actual narrative is set, on which their text is about. So if you're doing that, you might want to actually look into that and why that might be significant. For instance, if a text has been made in the 1980s, but it's about a period which is just after World War II, for instance, there's clearly a disparity between when the composer is releasing the text, and when the text is actually placed in terms of its setting. So it's interesting to dive a little bit into why those differences might be there. Maybe it's showing that by projecting the composer's context onto a prior setting, there is a linkage there is some universality to it.
Yes,
often that comes up, so it's worth inquiring into that.
Or conversely, if the setting and the context is the same, why is the composer so intent on reflecting the specific elements of their contemporary world? Why are they trying to do that? Yeah, so points to consider.
That's right. All right. Well, if you have any questions on this, please do comment below, and we can answer you, or even if it's worth it, we'll make another video on it.
Yes, we will be going into the actual structuring of a Module B essay in another video. We'll get to that. But for now, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe to the channel. Check out our resources. You won't regret it, full of exemplar essays, context, form. There is so much in there to facilitate your studies. But thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.
Thank you very much.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do like the content, subscribe to our channel and we'll have more videos coming your way.
That's right, guys. Thanks for watching, and please make sure you check out our online resource database. We've had a team of state rank achievers and heads of English put these together for you, covering everything from essay structures and examples all the way through to craft of writing and comprehension skills. So check them out at ignitehsc.com.au, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.